So let's talk about crystals and grasp an understanding of how much crystals play a part in our world and our luminary workings. A crystal or crystalline solid is a solid material whose atoms, molecules, or ions are arranged in a highly ordered microscopic structure, forming a lattice that extends in all directions. We can reference Enoch chapter 14, verses 10 through 16 for a fantastic description of this. They elevated me aloft to heaven. I proceeded until I arrived at a wall built with stones of crystal. A vibrating flame surrounded it, which began to strike me with terror. Into this vibrating flame I entered, and drew nigh to a spacious habitation built also with stones of crystal. Its walls, too, as well as the pavement, were formed with stones of crystal, and crystal likewise was the ground. Its roof had the appearance of agitated stars and flashes of lightning, and among them were cherubim of fire in a stormy sky. A flame burned around its walls, and its portal blazed with fire. When I entered into this dwelling, it was hot as fire and cold as ice. No trace of delight or life was there. Terror overwhelmed me, and a fearful shaking seized me. Violently agitated and trembling, I fell upon my face. In the vision I looked, and behold, there was another habitation more spacious than the former, every entrance to which was open before me, erected in the midst of a vibrating flame. And so greatly did it excel in all points, in glory, in magnificence, and in magnitude, that it is impossible to describe to you either the splendor or the extent of it. Its floor was on fire, above were lightnings and agitated stars, while its roof exhibited a blazing fire. Macroscopic single crystals are usually identifiable by their geometric shape. Some examples of large crystals include snowflakes, diamonds, and table salt. A little fact is, if the world oceans were to evaporate, we would be left with 4.5 million cubic miles of salt. This would be a cube measuring 165 miles on each side. Salt in water carries an electrical charge. Also, water-based ice in the form of snow, sea ice, and glaciers is a very common form of crystals and polycrystals. Let's look at some verses that may relate to this. Revelations 22:1, and he shewed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. Revelations 4:6, and before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal, and in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were four beasts full of eyes before and behind. Most inorganic solids are not crystals, but they are polycrystals. Some examples of these metals are rocks, ceramics, and ice. By volume and weight, we find the largest concentration of crystals in the Earth's bedrock. Rock, such as granite, have cooled very slowly and under great pressures have completely crystallized, but with many kinds of lava were poured out onto our surface and cooled rapidly. And in this group we find amorphous crystals or glassy matter. In these, the atoms have no periodic structure whatsoever. Examples of amorphous solids include glass, wax, and many plastics. Other crystalline rocks. The metamorphic rocks such as marbles, mica, and quartzites are recrystallized. This means that they were first at fragmental rock like limestone, shale, and sandstone, and have never been in a molten condition. Instead, high temps and pressure of metamorphism have acted on them by erasing them to their original structures and have induced recrystallization in the solid state. Now that we have an idea of what all is crystalline, let's shift to how crystals relate to electrical currents. This is due to the motion of ions and light particles. Ions move by hopping from site to site through the lattice. All solids can conduct electricity this way in crystals. The ion hops are induced by thermal fluctuations. As I said, they move within the lattice, vibrating around these points. Temperature is defined as the average energy of this vibrational motion. The more the ion move, the higher the temperature. Research shows that the higher the temperature, the more frequent are these thermal fluctuations. Ions therefore hop more often at higher temperatures. Ions are created in nature by sunlight. As the sun hits the compression point, it heats up greatly, so the switching and hopping occurs regularly during this time. As the sun hits the expansion point, the heat decreases and the ion's vibratory rate is decreasing. The light and heat begin to decrease for our sunsets. The same occurs at sunrise. Crystals, such as quartz, can be tapped for electricity using the piezoelectric method. By securing the crystal and subjecting it to a direct force with a permanent magnet, a detectable amount of electricity is released. We see this technology in cigarette lighters and gas grill ignition buttons. Continuously rapping on the crystal will produce usable electrical current. Although artificial, pyroelectric materials have been engineered. The effect was first discovered in minerals, such as tourmaline. The pyroelectric effect is also present in bone and tendon. Pyroelectricity is a property of certain crystals in which there is a natural polarization and as a result contain large electric fields. Pyroelectricity can be described as the ability of certain materials to generate a temporary voltage when they are heated or cooled. The change in temperature modifies the position of the atoms slightly within the crystal structure, such that the polarization of the material changes. This polarization change gives rise to a voltage across the crystal. A pyroelectric can be repeatedly heated and cooled to generate usable electrical power. This is the switching from positive to negative and expansion and compression points we see in our sun luminary. Now, if the temperature stays constant at its new value, the pyroelectric voltage gradually disappears due to the leakage current. The leakage can be due to the light particles moving through the crystal or ions moving through the air. Another example is gallium nitride, which is a semiconductor. The large electric fields in this material are detrimental in light-emitting diodes, but useful for the production of power transistors. Now let's look at crystals and light. So most people would say the fastest thing known is the speed of light, and it can't be stopped or trapped, right? Well, To stop or trap light is a technique called electromagnetically induced transparency. Researchers have done experiments. They start with a cryogenically cooled opaque crystal of yttrium silicate, which is an optical crystal material used as a host for various rare earth dopants. Doped with praseodymium, which is a soft silvery, malleable, and ductile metal, valued for its magnetic, electrical, chemical, and optical properties. It is too reactive to be found in native form, and pure praseodymium metal slowly develops a green oxide coating when exposed to air. A control laser is fired at the crystal, triggering a complex quantum level reaction that turns it transparent. A second light source, the data image source, is then beamed into the now transparent crystal. The control laser is then turned off, turning the crystal opaque. Not only does this leave the light trapped inside, but the opacity means the light inside can no longer bounce around. With nowhere to go, the energy from the photon is picked up by atoms within the crystal, and the data carried by the photon is converted into an atomic spin. To get the light back out of the crystal, the control laser is turned back on, and the spin excitations are emitted at photons. These atomic spins can maintain coherence for around a minute, after which the light pulse image fizzles. In essence, this entire setup allows for the storage and retrieval of data from light memory. It should be possible to store data for longer periods too, using other crystals, such as europium doped yttrium silicate, and by using specially tailored magnetic fields. Now we will look at one last bit and then explain why we are speaking about all this information. How can light be solid? Let's see how Ezekiel describes this. Ezekiel 1:6. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all four of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel was within another wheel. Ezekiel 10:9. Then I looked, and behold, 4 wheels beside the cherubim, 1 wheel beside each cherubim, and the appearance of the wheel was like the gleam of a tarnished stone. Locking individual photons together so they become like a solid object. Researchers constructed what they call an artificial atom, made of 100 billion atoms engineered to act like a single unit. They then brought this closer to the superconducting wire carrying photons. In one of the almost incomprehensible behaviors unique to the quantum world, the atom and photons became entangled so that their properties passed between the atom and the photons in the wire. The photons started to behave like atoms correlating with each other to produce one single oscillating system. Now, what I'm going to suggest that this is the process probably how the luminaries below occur. As it happens below, we see the lights above in our heavens. Electricity being moved along our lattice grid and being stopped and trapped inside crystals to show us our luminaries. This is science reverse engineering to recreate our sun. This is what the ancients showed us, and this is what is in our faces with the royals and popes, etc., carrying their scepters with precious crystalline stones and gems. This is depicted all over for us in ancient glyphs and texts. Just take a moment with APM eyes and imagine what is in the layers below. magnificent perfection of massive magnetic lines carrying electricity leading to crystals as described by Ezekiel in chapter 1, verse 22. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creatures was as the color of terrible crystal, stretched forth over their heads above. So let's define living creatures: full of vigor in active operation, or use in its natural state or place, having natural force and motion. It's easy to see how we are deceived about the living creatures and how the language has been messed with, and we believe the words to have meaning relating only to humans. However, if we know the language of the angels and understand it, we can see this is how our luminaries are working. What is that language? It's the language of frequency, magnetics, and light. To understand the original language, we need to look into etymology and understand what the words actually means. We covered a lot of this in our Sigil series on how to understand the language of the angels. So let's look at what Walter Russell has to say about crystals. The science of crystallography is today without the basic foundation of a fundamental law. It is today but an organized collation of known facts of unknown causes. It is today beyond the power of man to determine in advance the exact crystallization of any element, compound, mixture, or alloy. Nor can cleavage, twining, or other effects of crystallization be determined in advance of experiment or observation. The base principle, it will be no longer necessary for the chemist or metallurgist to waste precious effort in experimentation. The application of these simple laws, all effects can be worked out on paper, even to those amorphous effects which cannot be determined by experimentation. An application of his series of drawings to the following series, which ties crystallography to chemistry and electricity as a higher chemistry or electrochemistry, will be greatly simplified in the labors of the research chemists.